So I think at a certain point as a business, you have to ask yourself a very important question, which is, are you going to make a podcast or are you not going to make a podcast? And here we are. So we're Salus Technical, and we have decided to start a podcast. I don't know why I said that. Okay. So I'm Madison. I work here at Salus Technical as a customer success specialist and digital marketing specialist. And I'm going to hand it over to Dave to explain what it is we do and to introduce yourself. Dave?
Yep, so hi, my name is Dave Jamieson. So I'm a process safety engineer. That's an entirely made up job for high hazard industries. And what that is that's the engineering that focuses on the prevention of major accidents such as fires and explosions. So when you hear safety with Salus, it's not really slips, trips and falls, it's the prevention of fires and explosions, ship impact and that sort of thing. So Salus, we were founded in 2019 and we're named after the Roman goddess of safety and well-being. And yeah, we help our customers understand and manage their risks from major accidents. And we do that through 3 business units. We've got engineering, training, and our software divisions.
Awesome. We're not here to talk all about ourselves today, but I do think it would be interesting to go back a bit to the beginning of the early days of Salus from a business perspective and maybe talk about, as a relatively small business, we're experiencing rapid growth right now, but I think as small businesses, it is really important to kind of share knowledge and ideas to help each other out and really create that support. So let's talk a bit about the early days of Salus and how we were founded and why.
Yeah, so, I'd always wanted to have my own business. And in 2019, I decided, that was the right time. And I'd been working as a process safety engineer for about 10 years before that. So, thought that was a really worthwhile business to start. And what I thought was, there's all these new emerging industries, offshore wind, carbon capture, hydrogen. What could we do to, take the knowledge that I'd gained from oil and gas work to apply there? So we thought, well, let's build some software products. And that's what we set out to do. Unfortunately, we started less than 3 months before COVID. So, when we first started, it was all good and we won a few jobs. We got some people building our software. But unfortunately, in March 2020, just a week or so before we all got told to work from home, I was walking up, there's a street in Aberdeen called Albine Place, and I was walking up there and I got 3 phone calls while I was walking. The first one was to tell me that the person building my software is no longer going to be building my software. And the next 2 were to tell me that my 2 long-term projects that I'd won had been cancelled. So I got to the top of Albine Place and we had no customers and we had no software. But fortunately, since then, we've supported quite a lot of late life oil and gas projects, which has really helped stimulate growth. And we've managed to get our software built, and we've also got an on-demand training course. So from March 2020, when we had literally nothing, just a little over 4 years later, we're now a team of 11. Our software is used by 45 companies globally in lots of different industries. So we've achieved what we set out there. We made an on-demand training course that's got over 1,500 people going through it, and yeah, we've got a team now of 4 process safety engineers.
Awesome. So when you look back to that time on Albine Place, you probably weren't thinking, "Oh wow, this is the best decision I've ever made," was to start my own company. But what was the turning point when you really were took a step back and looked around and you were like, "Oh wow, I've actually built a real company"?
Yeah. So a lot of our early customers were people that I maybe crossed paths with in the past, but anytime I met someone new and they asked me who I worked for, and I said, "Oh yeah, I work for Salus Technical," they would go, "Who?" And I'd have to explain. And then one day, I was in the lobby of the OEUK office, and I was just making small talk with the person beside me, and I said that I worked for Salus Technical because they'd asked, and I was ready to say my usual, and then that person was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you guys. I've used a bunch of your videos and read that, post and this and that." And this person knew of the company and began to talk to me as if we were some large company, when at the time it was just me and one other engineer. So that was the first time when I was like, "Oh wow, we're actually a real company. There's someone who's heard of us who I didn't know before." And probably another one as well. It was quite difficult to get our software made and in the hands of customers. And after maybe within about 3 months of it launching, when the first company emailed with a purchase order to say, like, we'd like to take your software, that was a huge moment. And that was like right during COVID too. So like I ran downstairs and, told Mrs. J, I was like, yeah, like, we've got our first purchase order. I think I actually printed it out and I've still got it printed out somewhere. That was two standout moments that I was like, okay, maybe we've got something here.
That's awesome. So as someone who kind of started their own business, but your background isn't necessarily in business, right? You're essentially just maybe a guy who just decided to start his own business one day. You had the motivation, but so what it would be your advice for someone maybe who was in your shoes or who was in your shoes that you were in a few years ago? What would be your advice for starting their own business?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously quite difficult to give advice on that. Everyone's situation's a bit different. And probably for every piece of advice that you could give someone, the opposite piece of advice would also be true. Like be cautious, but also take risk, for example. So I think with me is, if I'm being honest, I probably should have started Salus maybe 2.5 years before I did. I had a decision to take a new job and I thought I'll get a few more years experience and then I'll start. And that was fine, but I think looking back, that was probably just me, maybe not wanting to take a leap of faith. So certainly one piece of advice that would be is it's never the right time. There'll always be a reason not to do it. But if you're starting to think maybe it's the right time, it probably is the right time. And the other one's about, do the appropriate level of planning. But I say appropriate, there was someone else that I know who started a business at the same time as me and they've been really successful. And their business plan, was really detailed. But had I done that, after COVID kicked off, that plan, wouldn't have been worth very much. So I think there's, do the appropriate level of planning, understand what risks you've got. But if you feel that the time's right, then the time probably is right.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone, think with also minimal management experience, as you've talked about before, do you want to talk about your management approach and why you think it works so well for a business like Salus?
Yeah, well, now we're a team of 11, so there's 10 people that in some way, either report to me or report to someone that does. So, I'd never had a single person report to me before I started Salus, and I didn't even really tell the first few employees that was that's the case. So, I mean, my philosophy is, is hire good people, which obviously is something that can be quite hard to do. But if you've got a good team, set them up for success by giving them all the tools that they need, by really explaining why and what it is that you want to do. Make your expectations clear, but then get out of their way and let them do it. I'm the opposite of a micro manager. But one philosophy that I read years ago that I probably apply is the commander's intent. And that's about yes, fine, you'll give someone a set task to do or a set project to complete. But if you explain to them, so say in the military that the goal was to capture the flag on the hill, and I might tell you to go to the left and someone else to go to the right. But ultimately, if you guys know that that's the overall intent, if something happens on the way that you think, right, okay, Dave doesn't have this information, but he's been very clear about what he wants, then you're free to do what you think's right, to get there. And we see that all the time. I've got 3 software developers. I've got people who look after our customers and sales, and I get these people together all the time, really explain clearly what it is that we're trying to do. And I see quite often that these people amongst themselves are proposing new ways of doing things that I would never have thought about doing. So yeah, I really try and do that. But yeah, going from 0 to 10 reports in 4 years, it's been quite quite a change. But yeah, I think it's going quite well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that probably is the most important lesson for a manager to learn, is how to strike the balance between trusting your employees and also ensuring that we're all working towards the same business goal. So we all come from diverse backgrounds and maybe have different ways of doing things, but I think as long as we're all working towards the same business goal, that's at the end of the day.
And I think there's a balance to be struck. It's about I think if I took that too far, you might come across as non-supportive to the team. So they're striking the balance of letting your talented people do their thing, but also being there when you need them. Which does happen. I've been micromanaged in the past, and I've probably been managed in the way that I am managing now in the past, and both have got their pros and cons. But yeah, you've got to make sure that you're there when your team need more advice or guidance from you.
Awesome. So I know you said, going back to like the beginning of Salus and everything and how it was founded, you had to be really adaptable, obviously with COVID and everything. But do you have plans for the future? Are they strict plans? Do you have like 5 and 10 year plans, or do you just kind of have like a general outlook?
I mean, I have a plan. I'd say, keep doing what we're doing. We seem to have evolved that we've got 3 very separate business units. So, I'm definitely trying to bring those back together. I'd say with our software, for example, we've got our Salus suite, and that's 3 really easy to use pieces of software. I want to try and build that into more of a toolkit. So somewhere between 5 and 10, bits of software bundled together. We're on, I think, 44 customers. Let's try and get to 444 customers. But, keep doing that. We've got our training course, that's done really well, and that's something that we I've really enjoyed building. So probably try and build a suite of training courses, and with our engineering as well. We wouldn't want to scale that up too much, but we've got quite a lot of exciting projects in different industries and stuff. So I think just keep doing more of that. So it's probably more of the same, but just gradually build. But I wouldn't want to define a 5 or 10 year plan. But I think our current direction of travel is pretty good. We have to be mindful as well that high hazard industries, it's not exactly a solid footing, to be on. There's so much in the news. Obviously, we've got a general election coming up, and that'll directly impact lots of our customers. There's lots of mergers and acquisitions, and if you think one of our services is training, quite a lot of that gets put on hold when that sort of stuff gets done. Traditionally the oil price can be quite volatile, but I think the overall energy price for new industries such as offshore wind will have an impact. So we have to be mindful that there's a lot that we can control, but there's also a lot that we can't control. So continue to take the appropriate level of risk, because I think that you need to take some risk to grow your business, but equally be mindful that any one of our business units might have some troubles that we have to resolve. But we've got 3 separate business units and a really diverse group of customers. So for example, our engineering and training's really, really weighted towards the UK, but our software is quite the opposite. We've got very few UK customers, and then you can make the same case for different industries and company size and type. So I think certainly try to maintain that diversity in our customer base, and then we'll probably be okay.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we'll chat about some of the more exciting projects that we have coming up. But yeah, no, thank you. So Dave, one of the things you tell all of your employees to read, and probably I think everyone you meet to read, is called the mom test. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Or the mum test.
You were right first time. Yeah.
So what is that? Do you want to explain a bit about what the mom test is and how you apply it in your day at Salus?
Yeah, so it's obviously really cliche to recommend people read business books, but I think that above any book I've ever read in terms of helping Salus Technical, the mum test was the best one by far. I'd encourage anyone, any business owner, or just anyone to read that book. It's a very short book. You'll read it in an afternoon, and it's all about avoiding the mistake that everyone makes, which when you've got an idea for a business or a product, or you're going to your boss with an idea for something new that you can do for a project, is you tell them about it and then ask them what they think about it. And like if you were asking your mum, of course your mum's going to say, "Oh, that's a great idea, son," and everyone or most people are really nice and programmed just to say that's a great idea. And I've been pitched loads of products in the past where I've told the person, "Oh yeah, that's good," and I know full well I'm not going to pay for that. So the premise of the mum test is about validating the idea for your product without mentioning your product. So it's about, does the person have the problem? Do they know they've got the problem? Do they think the problem is worth solving? And would they pay to solve the problem? So if I said to you, "Oh yeah, it must be awful that you have to bend down and tie your shoelaces every day," and you go, "Oh yeah, I've got a really bad back," and then we kept going. I was like, "Oh, what if you could just put on this magic pair of shoes and click your fingers, and then the shoelaces would tie themselves?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." But then if I came to you a few months later with a £300 pair of trainers that self-tie, you're probably not going to buy them. But I've walked away from that, first conversation that we had thinking. So it's all about a set of questions and a mindset of, not mentioning your product. Maybe at the very end, if someone has said, I would pay for this, then you can talk about it. So I've used that for quite a few different places, certainly for our software and for our training course. So, take our training course, for example, I had an idea that some on-demand, like short training focused at non-safety people, would be a good idea. But instead of asking people if they thought that was a good idea, I just spoke to loads of people about their problems with their confidence people safety-wise, or why they're having incidents. And then I talked to people about what their challenges with training were. And quite a few people almost said, I just wish there was like a suite of videos that I could just watch, and whether someone was offshore, onshore, working from home, on site, then they'd be able to see it. And then you just kind of go from there. So I would recommend that book to anyone. Yep.
And going back to what you said about the mom test, I remember something that resonated with me was bad feedback is the most valuable feedback you can get. So if you hear someone just say, oh, this is a really good product, I think I'll buy it, alarm bell should be going off in your head, because they probably just don't even really care about it to a certain extent. You know what I mean? So good feedback is not nearly as valuable as bad feedback.
Yeah, because you're going through, when you're asking someone about your idea, you need to stop yourself from wanting them to say it's a good idea. You actually want them to say the reasons why. I had what I thought was a really good idea for a new service that we could offer. And I used the mum test technique on a few people, and I quickly learned it wasn't a good idea. And one of the guys, even afterwards, it was clear it wasn't an idea that I was going to pursue, and I told him what it was, and he was like, yeah, I'm really sorry that I've kind of squashed that. And I was like, no, this is awesome. In 4 20-minute conversations, I stopped myself from probably spending 6 months, building something. So you want to quickly get to the bad feedback as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about the training course, I believe the training course wasn't even really in your original plans for something that you were going to offer as Salus. Is that right? Can you talk about kind of why you decided to do it and how you went along with it?
Yeah, I think the training course is probably the biggest learning I've done as a business owner. So I put training on my website just to make our company sound bigger than it was. And we actually got loads of inquiries for training, and I really enjoyed delivering training. And it was mostly focused at non-safety people, the really basics of process safety. I thought it would be the really advanced stuff, that I pretend that I can do. But it was the more straightforward stuff. But it's a really difficult business unit to run. You get an inquiry for training, and you meet with the person, and then you write the course. But every single time when you send them exactly what they've asked for, they've got comments and changes. And this is me starting to see the some of the problems. It could be 4 or 5 months before you can schedule people's calendars with people coming in from onshore and things like that. So, in what is a 1 or 2 hour classroom training session, it's actually 6 months, from start to finish. So I just had this epiphany one day. I was like, well, what if we recorded it all, a bit more appealing to the TikTok generation, shorter videos, all of them have got a call to action. And it was when I thought, well, let's make it as short as possible. And that was when I thought, right, okay, this is something quite exciting. So did some interviews, as I said, and I thought, right, okay, there's definitely something here. But it was a huge risk for us. It probably cost more than half of the money that we had in the bank to get that written and filmed and edited and marketed. So it was a huge risk. And also there was a huge opportunity cost of my time. It took a long time to write it. So what I did was I wrote 3 videos, 3-minute videos, and I went to a nice fancy office to get it recorded to look nice, and then I sent those around to a lot of people, and the feedback was, if this was a more polished production, we would take it. Managed to get one company to pay up front, and then I just got my head down, got the rest of the scripts finished. But it was such a challenge, anyone who's written script or something, or a report, or maybe an article or a blog piece, you can read it. You can read your own work too much that you start to think this is terrible. And I'd managed to get the scripts done, did a few dry runs with people. The feedback was okay. I had the person who filmed us sort of helped massage the script a bit. But by the time that I was going down, and I remember that was a couple of years ago, went down. It was June. It was a roasting hot day. I was sitting in Edinburgh Airport. getting my flight to London. But I just had that week 2 companies say, "Oh, like we're not really that interested, in like taking this." So at that time, and then I had a few comments from this script guy about maybe you could tweak this and tweak that. This was the night before filming, and if you'd offered me the chance just to pretend it never happened, get all my money back, and not having written it, I definitely would have taken it, because at that time I thought this isn't going to be a success at all. But then we filmed it. Filming went really well. The director was great, and I think he squeezed, everything out of me that he possibly could. And ever since, it's gone really well. Over 1,500 people have taken it. Like 3 or 4 companies have signed up their entire workforce up, and it's been probably one of the single best things that we've done. And the income from that's really helped, grow the team. So it just shows you, going right back to what you asked me about that mum test, is we really validated that idea, and then we executed on that idea. Yeah, I had loads of doubts on the way, but if I had just built the course that I originally thought we should build, it wouldn't have been a success, because it was learning that feedback from people that really changed what we built. So that's been a huge journey for us. It's something that we focus on quite a lot just now, and we're definitely going to make some follow-up courses.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about for business owners, like, you have to be cautious, but you have to take risks. Like, how do you balance that? But it's like, good thing you took the risk, because I don't think Salus would be where it is today.
No, absolutely. And with some changes that have been made to software and things being rewritten, we had to invest quite a lot in rewriting a large part of our Salus suite, and it was the income from the training course that helped pay for that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That was 50% of our cash reserves invested in a new unproven product. So I'm very glad we made the risks. But going back to what we said at the beginning, there's that balance of keep your feet on the ground but shoot for the stars. And there'll absolutely be times when we might get that wrong. And we've had that with software before. We've invested in some features that we thought would really help attract this new market or this new sector, and it's not really worked out. So, but it's something that we'll keep doing.
I want to pivot a bit to talk maybe about this report, which at first glance just looks like a regular report, and it is. But do you want to talk about why it's so significant to our company? Along with the training course, it's probably the other thing that people might recognize when they hear the name Salus is our HSE inspection report. So can you talk about why that's so significant?
So we started that for 2 reasons. I probably got a warning from the regulator when I was a technical authority. We got a letter item for a system that I was responsible for, but we weren't doing something quite right. And I was really worried about it. It was something that happened under my watch. There was an email list of other technical authorities, and we communicated regularly. So I emailed them to ask them about the problem, and it turned out that 2 or 3 of them had the exact same letter from the regulator in the past couple of years, and they were great and explained what their company had done to resolve it, and we were able to quickly resolve it too. But that was something that sat at the back of my head for months and months of I just wish that that these letters, and there's about 150 of them, are sent each year. I just wish that these were out there for everyone to see, because then there'd be a chance to learn. But also, when I started Salus, I said I want to at least do one thing that we try and move the needle, on safety in the industry. Yes, we deliver value to our customers, and we help them with that. But I want to try and do something, that the wider industry, can benefit from. So we had the idea, let's do a freedom of information request to the regulator. We got the 147 letters that were sent in 2019. We chose that because during COVID, there was a lot of, remote inspections and things like that done. So we thought that 2020 and 2021 might be, maybe not representative. And, we did it, unfortunately, the year before ChatGPT, so we had to do it by hand, do it manually. But we went through every single one, went through every single offshore inspection guide, of which there's about 20, and we mapped all the findings. So there's over 1,000 non-compliances. We mapped each one to the success criteria from the relevant inspection guide. And what we found was there was loads of recurring findings. So what we mean by that is an offshore duty holder, more than 3 of them getting the same finding or a very similar finding. And what our our hypothesis was, well, if 3 people are struggling with this one issue, you can bet that there's going to be at least 3 more that are too. So we made that document. We anonymized all the data. We made that document free of charge. And again, back talking about the course, I was very nervous about sending it out. Almost didn't send it out. I was worried, is there something like this already there that we just haven't seen? Or are people going to be upset that we've done this? But quite the opposite. And it's been downloaded, I think last count, over 10,000 times. And and each of those all have been shared with people. And we won an Officer Safety Award for it too. So I'm really glad that we did that, and loads of people have learned things from it. And it also, going back to what I said about making change, it has led to real change. I was at an industry forum, about 6 months ago, and there was someone from the HSC there. They didn't know that I was there or didn't know who I was, and he said, "Oh well, yeah, based on the Salus report, as he called it, that was published last year, we've been asked to, provide a summary of each inspection topic. So I've gone to the head inspector of each topic, and here's the top 3 findings of the last year." And then he went through what was an excellent presentation, and it gave loads of insight, that I took, and a lot of people there took. But that only happened because we did that. So that's real change made by us, doing that. So yeah, we're delighted with how that turned out.
Yeah, I bet that was one of those real, wow, I have a real company kind of moments, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I was sitting beside one of my customers, and when the guy referred to it as the Salus report, my customer gave me a little elbow and they ribs and a little wink. But yeah, and that's them talking about our company. But that's a really meaningful bit of work that we did, and the fact that it's led the regulator to make, albeit a subtle change, but a change nonetheless of how they communicate what they found to industry, then that's great. And that's exactly what we wanted out of it is, wouldn't it be great if all of this was available to everyone? And yeah, it seems to have worked very well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to pretend like I'm not going to tee you up perfectly for this, but was this a one-off report, or is there something similar maybe happening in the future?
When we originally did it, we thought this will be a one-off report. But given some of the things I'd said about the reaction to what we've done, and now that we've got a team of engineers, I think it's a good thing for them to go through all of these, and we've got a lot more tools available to us. We can use a bit of generative AI to tag a lot of the findings to make it a lot easier. So yeah, we're going to release something later this year. Exactly what that'll be, we don't quite know. We're going to speak to some of our customers. We're going to wait and see what we find, but we've got, now we've got 4 years worth of letters. So we're either going to make another document that'll have its own slant, or we will make a product online that you can go to and ask questions to, and it'll give you the answer based on the letters. But yeah, we're really keen to later this year just do something else with it.
And do you know what role AI is going to play in it? I know you said using creating tags and things like that. Is it just going to sort the letters for you? Is it going to play a larger role, or what's the deal there?
Well, I'm really keen, and actually one of the reasons why we first started doing this as well, before we decided to do a guidance document, is I thought it'd be a really good job for our graduate engineers to go through all of this, because there's really valuable stuff in there, and if you've got, the business model for an engineer is that 70% of their time spent doing reimbursable work, but the other 30%, is doing something else. So, we are young engineers. I want them to have a meaningful project for that other 30% of the time. But what I don't want to do is have AI doing the work for them. I want them to learn from doing this, and I think that it'll have a higher value the product anyway. But what we can do is we can use AI to sort and tag the data. So I mentioned that there's circa 20 inspection topics. There's various other ways that we could categorize this stuff. So certainly we can get AI to do a bit of the heavy lifting on that, so that when we're looking at a specific topic or a specific finding type, the letters to read are just presented to the team, rather than what we had to do the first time round, which was literally read and manually tag every single one. And that's about that's a much more valuable use of my engineers' time, if they're spending their time engineering rather than sorting data. So yeah, AI will play a minor role, but it's going to be a Salus engineering-led project.
Awesome. We'll have to talk more a bit about AI down the road, but thank you.